Kay was disconcerted, irritated by the conversation. For the first time since his arrival, he felt really tired. The long journey he had made seemed at first to have imposed no strain upon him. How quietly he had sauntered through the days step by step. But now the consequences of his exertion were making themselves felt, and at the wrong time too. He felt irresistibly drawn to seek out new acquaintances, but each new acquaintance only seemed to increase his weariness. If he forced himself in his present condition to go on, at least as far as the castle entrance, he would have done more than enough. So he resumed his walk, but the way proved long. For the street he was in, the main street of the village, did not lead up to the castle hill. It only made towards it and then, as if deliberately, turned aside. And though it did not lead away from the castle, it got no nearer to it either. At every turn, Kay expected the road to double back to the castle, and only because of this expectation did he go on. He was flatly unwilling, tired as he was, to leave the street, and he was also amazed at the length of the village, which seemed to have no end. Again and again, the same little houses, and frost-bound window panes, and snow, and the entire absence of human beings. But at last, he tore himself away from the obsession of the street and escaped into a small side lane, where the snow was still deeper, and the exertion of lifting one's feet clear was fatiguing. He broke into a sweat, suddenly came to a stop, and could not go on. Well, he was not on a desert island. There were no cottages to right and left of him. He made a snowball and threw it at a window. The door opened immediately. The first door that had opened during the whole length of the village. And there appeared an old peasant in a brown fur jacket, with his head cocked to one side. A frail and kindly figure. "May I come into your house for a little?" asked Kay. "I'm very tired." He did not hear the old man's reply, but thankfully observed that a plank was pushed out towards him to rescue him from the snow. And in a few steps, he was in the kitchen. A large kitchen, dimly lit. Anyone coming in from outside could make out nothing at first. Kay stumbled over a washing tub. A woman's hand steadied him. The crying of children came loudly from one corner. From another, steam was welling out and turning the dim light into darkness. Kay stood as if in the clouds. "He must be drunk," said somebody. "Who are you?" cried a hectoring voice. And then obviously to the old man, "Why did you let him in?" "Are we to let in everybody that wanders about in the street?" I am the Count's land surveyor, said Kay, trying to justify himself before this still invisible personage. Oh, it's the land surveyor, said a woman's voice. And then came a complete silence. You know me then? Asked Kay. Of course, said the same voice curtly. The fact that he was known did not seem to be a recommendation. At last, the steam thinned a little, and Kay was able to gradually make things out. It seemed to be a general washing day. Near the door, clothes were being washed, but the steam was coming from another corner, where in a wooden tub larger than any Kay had ever seen, as wide as 2 beds, 2 men were bathing in steaming water. But still, more astonishingly, although one could not say what was so astonishing about it, was the scene in the right-hand corner. From a large opening, the only one in the back wall, a pale, snowy light came in. Apparently from the courtyard, and gave a gleam as of silk to the dress of a woman who was almost reclining in a high armchair. She was suckling an infant at her breast. Several children were playing around her, peasant children, as was obvious, but she seemed to be of another class. Although, of course, illness and weariness give even peasants a look of refinement. Sit down, said one of the men, who had a full beard and breathed heavily through his mouth, which always hung open, pointing. It was a funny sight. With his wet hand over the edge of the tub towards a settle, and showering drops of warm water all over Kay's face as he did so. On the settle, the old man who had admitted Kay was already sitting, sunk in vacancy. Kay was thankful to find a seat at last. Nobody paid any further attention to him. The woman at the washing tub, young, plump, and fair, sang in a low voice as she worked. The men stamped and rolled about in the bath. The children tried to get closer to them, but were constantly driven back by mighty splashes of water which fell on Kay too, and the woman in the armchair lay as if lifeless, staring at the roof without even a glance towards the child at her bosom. She made a beautiful, sad, fixed picture, and Kay looked at her for what must have been a long time. Then he must have fallen asleep, for when a loud voice roused him, he found that his head was lying on the old man's shoulder. The men had finished with the tub, in which the children were now wallowing in charge of the fair-haired woman, and were standing fully dressed before Kay. It appeared that the hectoring one with the full beard was the less important of the two. The other, a still slow-thinking man who kept his head bent, was not taller than his companion and had a much smaller beard, but he was broader in the shoulders and had a broad face as well. and it was he who said, "You can't stay here, sir. Excuse the discourtesy." "I don't want to stay," said Kay. "I only wanted to rest a little. I have rested, and now I shall go." "You're probably surprised at our lack of hospitality," said the man. "But hospitality is not our custom here. We have no use for visitors." Somewhat refreshed by his sleep, his perception somewhat quickened, Kay was pleased by the man's frankness. He felt less constrained, poked with his stick here and there, approached the woman in the armchair, and noted he was physically the biggest man in the room. "To be sure," said Kay. "What use would you have for visitors? But still you need one now and then. Me, for example, the land surveyor." "I don't know about that," replied the man slowly. "If you'd been asked to come, you're probably needed. That's an exceptional case, but we small people stick to our tradition, and you can't blame us for that." No, said Kay. "I am only grateful to you and everyone here." And taking them all by surprise, he made an adroit turn and stood before the reclining woman. Out of weary blue eyes she looked at him. A transparent silk kerchief hung down to the middle of her forehead. The infant was asleep on her bosom. "Who are you?" asked Kay. And disdainfully, whether contemptuous of Kay or of her own answer was not clear, she replied, "A girl from the castle." It had only taken a second or so, but already the two men were at either side of Kay and were pushing him towards the door, as if there were no other means of persuasion, silently, but putting out all their strength. Something in this procedure delighted the old man, and he clapped his hands. The woman at the bathtub laughed too, and the children suddenly shouted like mad. Kay was soon out in the street, and from the threshold the two men surveyed him. Snow was falling again, yet the sky seemed a little brighter. The bearded man cried impatiently, "Where do you want to go? This is the way to the castle, and that to the village." Kay made no reply to him, but turned to the other, who in spite of his shyness seemed to him the more amiable of the two, and said, "Who are you? Whom I have to thank for sheltering me?" "I am the tanner Laceman," was the answer, "but you owe thanks to nobody." "All right," said Kay. "Perhaps we'll meet again." "I don't suppose so," said the man. At that moment, the other cried, with the wave of his hand, "Good morning, Arthur. Good morning, Jeremiah." Kay turned round. So there were really people to be seen in the village streets. From the direction of the castle came two young men of medium height, both very slim in tight-fitting clothes, and like each other in their features. Although their skin was a dusky brown, the blackness of their little pointed beards was actually striking by contrast. Considering the state of the road, they were walking at a great pace, their slim legs keeping time. "Where are you off to?" shouted the bearded man. One had to shout to them. They were going so fast and they would not stop. "On business," they shouted back, laughing. "Where?" "At the inn." "I'm going there too," yelled Kay, suddenly louder than all the rest. He felt a strong desire to accompany them. Not that he expected much from their acquaintance, but they were obviously good and jolly companions. They heard him but only nodded and were already out of sight. Kay was still standing in the snow and was little inclined to extricate his feet only for the sake of plunging them in again. The tanner and his comrade, satisfied with having finally got rid of him, edged slowly into the house through the door, which was now barely ajar, casting backward glances at Kay, and he was left alone in the falling snow. A fine setting for a fit of despair, it occurred to him. If only I was standing here by accident instead of design. Just then, in the hut on his left hand, a tiny window was opened, which had seemed quite blue when shut, perhaps from the reflection of the snow, and was so tiny that when opened, it did not permit the whole face of the person behind it to be seen, but only the eyes, old brown eyes. "There he is," Kay heard a woman's trembling voice say. "It's the land surveyor," answered a man's voice. Then the man came to the window and asked, not unamiably, but still as if he too were anxious to have no complications in front of his house, "Are you waiting for somebody?" "For a sledge to pick me up," said Kay. "No sledges will pass here," said the man. "There's no traffic here." "But it's the road leading to the castle," objected Kay. All the same," said the man with a certain finality. "There's no traffic here." Then they were both silent. But the man was obviously thinking of something, for he kept the window open. "It's a bad road," said Kay to help him out. The only answer he got, however, was, "Oh yes." But after a little, the man volunteered, "If you like, I'll take you in on my sledge." "Please do," said Kay, delighted. "What is your charge?" "Nothing," said the man. Kay was very surprised. "Well, you're the land surveyor," explained the man, "and you belong to the castle. Where do you want to be taken?" "To the castle," returned Kay quickly. "I won't take you there," said the man without hesitation. "But I belong to the castle," said Kay, repeating the other's very words. "Maybe," said the man shortly. "Oh well, take me to the inn," said Kay. "All right," said the man. "I'll be out with the sledge in a moment." His whole behavior had the appearance of springing not from special desire to be friendly, but rather from a kind of selfish, worried, and almost pedantic insistence on shifting Kay away from the front of the house. The gate of the courtyard opened, and a small light sledge, quite flat, without a seat of any kind, appeared, drawn by a feeble little horse, and behind it, limped the man, a weakly stooping figure with gaunt, red, snuffling face that looked peculiarly small beneath a tightly swathed woolen scarf. He was obviously ailing, and yet only to transport Kay, he had dragged himself out. Kay ventured to mention it, but the man waved him inside. All that Kay elicited was that he was a coachman from Gerstacke, and that he had taken this uncomfortable sledge because it was standing ready, and to get out one of the others would have wasted too much time. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the sledge. "I'll sit beside you," said Kay. "I'm going to walk," said Gerstacke. "But why?" asked Kay. "I'm going to walk," repeated Gerstacke, and was seized with a fit of coughing, which shook him so severely that he had to brace his legs in the snow and hold on to the rim of the sledge. Kay said no more, but sat down on the sledge. The man's cough slowly abated, and they drove off. The castle above them, which Kay had hoped to reach that very day, was already beginning to grow dark and retreated again into the distance. But as if to give him a parting sign till their next encounter, a bell began to ring merrily up there. A bell, for at least a second, made his heart palpitate, for its tone was menacing too, as if it threatened him with the fulfillment of his vague desire. This bell soon died away, however, and its place was taken by a feeble, monotonous little tinkle which might have come from the castle, but might have been somewhere in the village. It certainly harmonized better with the slow-going journey, with the wretched-looking, yet inexorable driver. "I say," cried Kay suddenly. They were already near the church. The inn was not far off, and Kay felt he could risk something. "I'm surprised that you have the nerve to drive me around on your own responsibility. Are you allowed to do that?" Gerstacke paid no attention, but went on walking quietly beside the little horse. "Hi!" cried Kay, scraping some snow from the sledge and flinging a snowball which hit Gerstacke full in the ear. That made him stop and turn around. But when Kay saw him at such close quarters, the sledge had slid forward a little. This stooping and somehow ill-used figure, with the thin, red-tired face and cheeks that were different, one being flat and the other fallen in, standing, listening with his mouth open, displaying only a few isolated teeth. he found that what he had just said out of malice had to be repeated out of pity. That is, whether Gerstacker was likely to be penalized for driving him about. "What do you mean?" asked Gerstacker uncomprehendingly. But without waiting for an answer, he spoke to the horse, and they moved on again.